Now, these are the live visuals that we're getting in from Tel Aviv. This is the Air Force One that is landing in Tel Aviv at the moment. As you know, U.S. President Joe Biden has now arrived in Israel to calm down tensions in an effort to calm down tensions in the war between Israel and Hamas. However, in the last 24 hours, as we have been reporting, these diplomatic efforts have faced massive setbacks. Now, this is the Air Force One, the United States of America. You can see it's written on the Air Force One. This is U.S. President Joe Biden, who has just now landed in Tel Aviv. U.S. President Joe Biden has arrived in Israel. The effort here is to calm down tensions in the region, also contain the war between Israel and Hamas. However, in the developments that we've seen in the past 24 hours, there have been massive setbacks to all these diplomatic overtures by the United States. Jordan, in fact, has also called off U.S. President Joe Biden's planned summit with Arab leaders. That was the second leg of this visit by U.S. President Joe Biden. These are the live visuals that we're getting from Tel Aviv. This is the Air Force One. We're also now being joined by principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us. We're getting the live visuals from Tel Aviv. The Air Force One has landed. U.S. President Joe Biden is in Israel. Just to begin with, Siddhant, what can you tell us of the engagements that have been planned for the day? There seems to be some issue with the line there. We'll try and get Siddhant Sibal back online with us. But for now, these are the visuals that we're getting from Tel Aviv. This is the Air Force One, which has just now landed in Tel Aviv. These are the live visuals that are coming in. U.S. President Joe Biden is in Israel now. His efforts to calm down tensions in the war between Israel and Hamas will be closely watched by everyone from across the globe. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden's trip, it was a fraught trip to begin with, a high-stakes visit to start with. And in fact, the second leg of this visit has been called off, which was Jordan. And Jordan has called off President Joe Biden's planned summit with the Arab leaders after the deadly explosion at the Gaza hospital, which killed hundreds. We seem to have Siddhant Sibal back online with us. Siddhant, I hope you can hear me now.
Well, yes, Haim, I can hear you. The U.S. President Joe Biden has reached Tel Aviv. This is a visit that is a high-stakes visit. I'm standing at a location near the hotel where he will be present and meeting the leaders here, the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli President. But there's a lot of hope that this visit will help in some kind of diplomatic solution, especially for the family members of the hostages. I'm standing at a location where the family members of the hostages are protesting.
Right,
it's a
and
silent
we're also
protest,
getting visuals
many of them going through one of the most painful
there.
period of their lives.
Right. Sorry to cut you, Siddhant. We're just getting live visuals of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu there to receive U.S. President Joe Biden. Please continue, Siddhant. These are the live visuals that we're getting. Siddhant, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. So it looks like that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also reached the airport to receive the U.S. President Joe Biden. But essentially, next 2 or 3 hours will be very crucial here in Tel Aviv, where the U.S. President will be holding key talks with the political leadership. It's largely a solidarity visit, but the hopes are high that he will be traveling. He will be, of course, making sure that there is some kind of diplomatic solution. But let me bring you closer to a wall, which is a wall which has the pictures of the hostages. There you can see these pictures of the hostages, and the family members will be hoping that that the hostages will be released. There will be some kind of solution that can come through the visit, and that's the big focus for many of these family persons who are standing here. But essentially, when it comes to the President Biden's visit, he was expected to travel to Jordan as well and meet the Arab leaders of Palestine, Jordan and Egypt, but that is not happening now.
Right, Siddhant, of course, as you mentioned as well, a lot seems to be riding on this visit by U.S. President Joe Biden to Israel. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Siddhant, this trip, it was going to be a high-stakes, fraught visit to begin with. Diplomatic efforts have only become more complicated after the explosion at the Gaza hospital that killed hundreds. Of course, the hope was that Joe Biden will be able to negotiate some sort of a peace deal in the region. What can you tell us about that? Clearly, at this time, that does not seem to be in the offing.
Well, yes, if the visit would have happened in Jordan, this would have been seen as a positive visit, perhaps an American-led effort to make sure that there is diplomatic solution to the ongoing crisis. But that's not happening now since the Gaza hospital explosion. We know that worries have increased for the region. Now, we know that yesterday we saw a large-scale protest in the Arab world. We also saw comments by the Iranian leadership as well. So, will there be escalation in the situation is the big question. But essentially, we have seen Tel Aviv buzzing with diplomatic activity. The U.S. president is not the first leader to arrive here since the Hamas terror attack. In the past, we know that the German chancellor was present. In fact, yesterday when he was about to leave Tel Aviv, he came under the rocket fire as well. Of course, that has been a kind of a norm here. Every evening, sirens buzz off, and we know that rockets are launched by Hamas from Gaza towards this very city. The Iron Dome, of course, works very well, and
right.
So far there hasn't been any
Siddhant, we're getting
news,
the visuals right
essentially
now.
now
US
the US
President Joe
president
Biden
here in Tel Aviv.
Right, Siddhant, thank you so much for bringing us the latest. We are getting these live visuals from Tel Aviv. That's US President Joe Biden on your screens right now. These are the visuals that are coming in. There he is hugging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. US President Joe Biden in Israel to show his unequivocal support for Israel in Israel's war with Hamas. There you can see him meeting Benjamin Netanyahu. US President Joe Biden has been received by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, as Siddhant mentioned earlier as well, these next 2 to 3 hours are going to be extremely crucial. These are the visuals you can see. These are the live visuals that we're getting in from Tel Aviv. There we have US President Joe Biden on a very rather high-stakes visit to Israel. There's a lot riding on this visit. As Siddhant showed us earlier, a lot of families of the hostages, they're waiting to be able to get a glimpse of the US president, to be able to convey that they are waiting for their families, family members who've been taken hostage. There you have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, from the possibility of a peace deal held by US President Joe Biden to frantic attempts to save face just a day later, the geopolitical situation we've seen, the landscape in West Asia, it's been evolving rapidly as the death toll continues to rise in Gaza following the attack on a hospital, with outrage spilling over to the streets as well. The Arab bloc has gone into a huddle in Saudi city of Jeddah as well. These are all the developments that have been coming in from the region. As of now, these are the visuals that we're getting from Tel Aviv. US President Joe Biden has arrived in Israel to show his unwavering support for Israel. As I mentioned earlier, the second leg of his trip that was to Jordan, that has been called off as of now, as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has declared 3 days of mourning and also called off this visit by US President Joe Biden. So as of now, he is in Israel. Let's see what comes out of this visit. We will continue to track all the developments closely. Now, this meeting assumes significance in the wake of the earlier meeting that was supposed to take place in Jordan's capital Amman as well. Now, as per the original plan that was announced on Tuesday by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the US president was all set to hold talks with Egypt's leader, Palestinian leader, and Jordan's King Abdullah II. We have Siddhant Sibal, our principal diplomatic correspondent, live online with us still. Siddhant, thank you so much for staying on with us. From now, what we see, US President Joe Biden has disembarked. His Air Force One is now on a motorcade. Now, Siddhant, once again, just for more clarity here, I would like to know what are the engagements that have been scheduled for the day?
Well, basically, he's going to meet the Prime Minister, the Israeli Prime Minister, is already met with that warm hug at the airport, but there will be a restricted meeting between the two leaders, followed by the US President meeting the war cabinet. He will also be meeting the Israeli President and then also the family members of the hostages as well. There is expected to be a statement by the US President here in Tel Aviv as well. It is just a visit, a brief visit, perhaps 3 to 4 hours maximum, but essentially a visit of solidarity and a support to the Israeli people, even as they deal with the worst terror attack since Israel's formation here. And essentially what we have seen on the ground is a protest by the family members, hoping that President Biden will be able to get their message and get some kind of deal that will help in the release of the family members. But all in all, situation remains very fluid and dynamic on the ground. This very city has seen several times rocket attacks being launched at it, and also in southern Israel, where we have been traveling, we have seen increased security with the presence of tanks and heavy artillery firing as well. So will there be a ground offensive on the ground is something that is being talked about. But of course, will the President of the United States carry a message that there should be humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza is also another aspect. Now the US President has several times tweeted on the Palestinian issue as well. So the role of the Americans in the region is something that will be showcased in the next 2 to 3 hours.
Right. Now, Siddhant, we've discussed this as well, that it's not very common for a US president to go into active war conflict zones as well. Let's talk a little bit about the measures that are in place to ensure safety and bolstered security. What can you tell us on that front?
Well, security has been increased all across Israel, not just today, just since the terror attack happened. You just can't go around anywhere here, and there are a lot of checkings, especially the further you go in south. There is increased security presence where cities have essentially become ghost town. Here in Israel, here in Tel Aviv as well. Similar situation, the Iron Dome, of course, has been working and has been making sure that there are no rockets which lands here in the city. But essentially, the fact that Hamas has been able to fire rockets even 1 week after the terror attack showcases Hamas's ability to disrupt normal life here in Tel Aviv, while sirens do blare often here. Now people have become accustomed to it. Most of them do run to shelter, but many of them just move around as life goes normal here in this city.
Right. Siddhant, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on this. We'll of course continue to track all the developments closely. Now, these are the live visuals that we're getting. This is the convoy. That's US President Joe Biden, who has arrived in Israel. Now, a few moments ago, we saw US President Joe Biden disembark from the Air Force One. He has touched down in Tel Aviv. He met Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. US President Joe Biden is in Israel to show his unequivocal support for Israel. What remains to be seen is how the situation unfolds in the region and how much US President Joe Biden his visit is able to yield significant results or not. That's something that remains to be seen. Now, as we know, the geopolitical landscape in West Asia, it has been evolving rapidly. The situation has turned 180 in the last 24 hours. This was already going to be a very high-stakes, fraught visit for US President Joe Biden. However, diplomatic efforts, those have been complicated further. They face massive setbacks with the outrage which is now spilling over to the streets. The Arab bloc has gone on to huddle in the Saudi city of Jeddah, in fact, and the Organization of the Islamic Nations, it's convened an emergency meet to discuss the situation in Palestine after the devastating attack on a Gaza hospital, which we've been reporting on. Now, the Arab bloc, as I mentioned, they have gone on to huddle in Saudi city of Jeddah. The Jordan leg of Joe Biden's trip has been called off as well. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called off US President Joe Biden's visit, also unprecedented. But in Palestine, the situation remains volatile, precarious, as is the situation in Israel as well. Now, the foreign minister of Iran, one of the most vocal critics of the Israel state, landed in Saudi Arabia earlier today for the meeting. The OIC includes most of the members of the Arab bloc, including the Ring of Nations that surround Israel. And this meeting, of course, it assumed significance in the wake of the earlier meeting that was supposed to take place in Jordan's capital Amman, which, as I mentioned, has been called off. As per the original plan announced on Tuesday by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the president was all set to hold talks with Egypt's Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas and Jordan's King Abdullah II. And this meeting would have followed his Israel visit and was widely speculated to offer some sort of a healing touch to the war-torn region. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.